Okay, so Redemption Inc., this is Adverse Backgrounds. Disclaimer, this video has a lot of generalisations and is made for the purpose of opening up people's minds to alternative ways of viewing societal issues. Sympathy, using logic to solve suffering. Empathy, using logic and emotion to solve suffering. I think a lot of the issues that we have in society at the moment is that people try and solve suffering and they don't actually understand. They've never actually been in the position of where that is. Next will be human nature, adverse backgrounds, community division and its effects, connection through adverse background initiatives, win-win thinking models, target 10, and the flow and effects to close the gap. Why adverse backgrounds? So it defines the problem properly, it unites rather than divides, makes the problems with the Indigenous community everyone's problem, rather than, as you can see, just circled off, trying to get people to solve issues in their own community. It's almost like if someone was drowning and you then expect that person who's drowning to be able to save themselves. That's sort of like the best way I can think of it. So this is people's priorities and layers of care. So this is you. Next layer out is your world. So the white circle, your closest friends and family. Yellow circle, friends, associates. Green is people you know within your community. This is the next circle out, is what you identify as. So if you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. So this is the next circle out on your priority layers of care. And then the opposite to what you identify as Indigenous or non-Indigenous. This is where belief systems start to come in, and this is where the gap community division comes in within society. Just to make a point of this, this is English-speaking countries. So the white line, like USA for example, and non-English speaking countries, China. So, fun fact, 12.59 billion US dollars of our resources sold goes to the USA. We have a 40% distrust of the USA. $219 billion worth of our resources get sold to China in US dollars. 81% of negative views on China, double that of the USA. So it just goes to show we rely a lot more on China than we do the USA, but because we look more like them and we can relate to them, we have a closer relationship with them, obviously, and we've got history and stuff with them. So adverse backgrounds affects every Australian, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and it's a point of connection rather than division. Yeah. Adverse background. So what I've done is I've subcategorized it. So type 1 is people who have caused harm to individuals or society due to past traumas or antisocial mentality. So these are the guys who have been in prison. These are the people that you might have DV perpetrators. This is the area that I'm going to specialise in. You know, people who have who create harm but don't intend on doing that. Type 2 are people who have adults who have suffered long-term emotional trauma due to being victims of people, type 1 people. Type 3 is people with mental health conditions, children growing up with type 1 or type 2 parents, or children displaying similar behaviour to types 1 or 2. The points of connection between 1, 2 and 3, a lot of them lived in fear-based paradigms of the world, higher rates of poverty, drugs and crime. So just to give people an idea, so the people who are from adverse backgrounds, it's not like, so if you look at the Gosnells Armidale area compared to maybe the Cottesloe area, so in Cottesloe, a white person in Cottesloe is not going to connect with a white person in Armidale like a white person in Armidale will with a non-Indigenous person from Armidale. So, this is what I mean by, like, people will try and make it all along racial lines, not realising that that's not the best way of actually going about trying to solve issues, and it's just become the political thing at the moment. The influences, the driving force behind behaviour. So I've just made research. So this is fear is the main points of influence. When I went to the youth justice thing, I noticed that I wasn't given the opportunity to be able to talk. But that was one of the things that was actually, I wasn't given the opportunity to be able to talk, but that was what, influence is such an important thing if you want to try and solve society issues. What's actually influencing people? Okay, as you can see, there's love-based courage, fear-based courage. This is from my prison mentality to growth mindset module. I just thought I'd include that in there to show that there is a difference between fear and love. And that's, that I've even put that into my training programs for guys coming out of prison, so they understand the difference between the types of courage. Okay, so looking at the collective conscious, which is the bottom left-hand picture, this is a fear-based hierarchy. So people who are in and out of prison, who live life by a certain way of life, they live in that fear hierarchy. So these are the levels of, and when I say most people actually go through these like different emotions, but for example, when people, the reactions to these emotions, for people that are coming from adverse backgrounds, usually create harm and suffering to other people. As you can see, like, regular Australian society, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, on the collective conscious, then there's adverse backgrounds, and they're getting hit at that line, which is that pride, and that stops people from going into those love-based paradigms. So types of thinking. So this is win-lose. So what happens is the government and resource sector, they do a lot of Indigenous business initiatives. So how does that lose? It creates black cladding, reduces access to non-Indigenous Australians accessing the community space. For example, Redemption Inc. gives false perceptions that issue is being addressed. So what that means is that regular Australian society sees a lot of stuff, but they think it's all being addressed, not realising that it's not actually really having a great impact on the people on the ground. And it also limits the impact on Indigenous Australians coming from adverse backgrounds, who haven't got the access, who can't get into mining, who can't get into resource sectors because of the fact that they've got an adverse action. Because of the adverse action is when you have a criminal record, and that actually stops you from being able to get opportunities in life. And most people that have come from struggle usually have a criminal record. And as you can see underneath the win-lose, the lose-lose is adverse backgrounds who are non-Indigenous. So these are people who, who don't tick any of the boxes, and they're the ones that get left in the cracks. Types of thinking. So win-win is obviously the best type of thinking you want to have. This is obviously like like government and resource sector starts doing initiatives for people coming from adverse backgrounds. So win, it opens up the community space for the other 96.7% of Australia and unites the countries tackling community issues. So that means that it no longer becomes a racial thing, and it now becomes let's just make a go at taking suffering on. Let's really try and help, because it's the people who in families who are suffering that actually don't benefit from all the political stuff that's happening at the moment. If that was the case, we would be leading the way in WA, and we're actually double the Indigenous incarceration rate everywhere else. So obviously it's not working. Okay, so using Target 10. So this is one of the 17 initiatives for closing the gap. If we make this a focal point, there's a flow-on effect. So it's the only gap initiative that has an inclusion space for all Australians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because it's just a win-win all around. A reduction in crime by helping people coming from adverse backgrounds. It was a flow of lived experience people. So hurt people, heal people, heal people. People need to understand that you need to have the empathy to be able to actually, to be able to do things. It's a unique gift that comes with people that have walked a path beforehand. You got the benefits of a safer society for everyone. Suffering at the source, it's obviously logical. A lot of the times people try and do band-aid initiatives. Why not try and do initiatives towards the people that create the harm and stop it at its root cause? So the flow-on effects. So obviously the most obvious one is Target 11. Young people overrepresented in the criminal justice system. If you've got Target 10, so like who do you think these kids, who's their uncles, who's their family? These are all guys in the actual prison system. Who are the people that they're going to listen to? It's not going to be some like good intentioned person. There's nothing wrong with that, but like it's going to be someone who's in their family, who's in their closest friends, relatives, who they used to look up to, who's now turned their path and is now walking the right track. So the first level of benefits from Target 10 is Target 11, Target 12, and Target 13. And the second level of benefits from Target 10 priority is the other ones of the 1s, 5, 7s, 9, and 14. And then that flows on. Level 3 would be the rest of the GAP initiatives. Target 10 is what I believe to be the most impactful out of all of them, because it actually flows on to every one of them. What we're doing, Target 10 and closing the gap, so we've got a whole section I'll put into the risk reduction and strategy community impact document. It's a 3-stage program, but it will be guys, Indigenous people who will come through Redemption Inc., who have come from prison, because they are also then would make them people of adverse background. they would then be able to come through, do the program, have access to the intellectual property that I'm developing, as well as, you know, for after 2 years, which will be when they're at their third stage and they're ready, they could then go on and use my intellectual property and set the same program up within Indigenous businesses in WA or across Australia to be able to help out. So that's how Redemption Inc. is doing its part to close the gap.